Motivation doesn't usually disappear the way people imagine. It doesn't shatter or burn out all at once. More often, it goes quiet. You still wake up, still function, still do what needs to be done, but the inner pull toward change stops answering. Not resistance, not laziness, just silence where momentum used to live. This silence is confusing because nothing is obviously wrong. From the outside, life continues. From the inside, the part of you that once leaned forward no longer moves. And the harder you try to force it back, the heavier everything feels. What's rarely explained is that motivation is not a moral quality or a personality trait. It's a response. It emerges when the nervous system senses safety, coherence, and possibility. When change begins to feel risky, uncertain, or identity-threatening, the system doesn't push harder. It slows you down. This video isn't about how to get motivated again. It's about understanding why motivation withdraws precisely when change matters most, and what that withdrawal is quietly trying to protect. When motivation doesn't collapse, but quietly stops responding. Motivation rarely fails in dramatic ways. It doesn't announce its exit or create a clear moment of loss. Instead, it withdraws slowly, almost politely. You still meet obligations, still move through routines, still appear functional, but the inner sense of forward pull goes silent. Not heavy, not broken, just absent. This is often mistaken for laziness because nothing external explains it. There is no visible crisis, no obvious exhaustion. Yet, internally, the part of you that once leaned toward growth no longer answers when called. Effort feels strangely hollow, like speaking into a room that no longer echoes back. What's important here is that silence is not failure. It's a signal. Motivation isn't an endless resource. It's a response that forms when effort feels meaningful and safe. When progress begins to feel uncertain or emotionally costly, the system doesn't rebel. It disengages, quietly. The loss of motivation, in this phase, isn't collapse, it's containment. The body is conserving energy while waiting for conditions that no longer feel guaranteed. How the nervous system applies brakes when change feels consequential. When change becomes truly important, the nervous system often reacts in the opposite way people expect. Instead of excitement, there is heaviness. Instead of drive, there is hesitation. This isn't weakness, it's protection activating beneath awareness. Significant change threatens more than habits. It threatens identity, predictability, and emotional continuity. Even positive change introduces unknowns, and the nervous system treats unknowns as potential risk. The closer you move towards something that matters, the louder the internal warning signals become. This is why motivation often fades precisely when stakes rise. The system interprets importance as exposure. Muscles tighten, thoughts slow, and energy pulls inward. What looks like procrastination is often the body applying brakes before danger, even if the danger is symbolic rather than real. The mistake is assuming motivation should override fear. In reality, motivation depends on safety. When change feels too consequential, the system prioritizes survival over progress. Until safety is restored, forward movement will continue to feel blocked, no matter how much you want it. Learned hesitation after effort fails to produce safety or reward. Motivation weakens after repeated attempts that don't lead to relief, progress, or stability. Not because desire disappears, but because the system learns something quietly. Effort doesn't guarantee safety. Each time you try and nothing changes, or something costs more than expected, the body takes note. Over time, hope becomes expensive. The nervous system begins to conserve it the way it conserves energy after injury. This isn't pessimism, it's memory. Emotional memory that says movement once led to disappointment, strain, or exposure without protection. So when you consider trying again, hesitation shows up before thought does. Not as a belief, but as a feeling of drag, delay, wait. What looks like lack of discipline is often a system that has learned to slow down before repeating pain. In this phase, motivation doesn't disappear because you stopped caring. It fades because caring without safety taught the body that reaching forward comes at a cost it no longer trusts. Decision overload and the dilution of forward energy. Motivation also erodes when there are too many possible directions. When every option feels viable, choosing one becomes risky. Each path implies the loss of another, and the nervous system registers that loss even before movement begins. Instead of clarity, the mind fills with comparison, analysis, and attention. Attention spreads outward, trying to hold every future at once. Energy that could support action dissolves into thought. Not because you're indecisive by nature, but because the system is trying to avoid regret. When no choice feels clearly safe, stopping feels safer than committing. Waiting feels responsible. Overthinking masquerades as preparation. Motivation thins out as it's divided among too many imagined outcomes. What drains motivation here isn't confusion, it's the pressure of consequence. The more meaning each decision carries, the harder it becomes to move without certainty. And certainty is something the nervous system rarely grants. Identity tension between who you believe you are and how you live. Motivation often drains when there is a growing gap between self-image and daily behavior. Not because you are incapable, but because maintaining an outdated identity consumes energy. You hold on to an idea of who you should be, while your life quietly moves in another direction. The tension between those two states never fully rests. This gap creates a subtle leak of motivation. Energy is spent justifying, compensating, or avoiding the discomfort of misalignment. Action feels heavier because it threatens to expose that the old identity no longer fits. Even positive change can feel destabilizing when it requires releasing a version of yourself that once felt safe. So motivation doesn't vanish. It gets redirected inward toward preservation. The system chooses familiarity over coherence, not because it prefers stagnation, but because unfamiliar identity feels like loss. Until the self is allowed to change without threat, forward energy will continue to thin out. Why motivation returns only when movement feels safe again. Motivation doesn't come back through force. It reappears when movement stops feeling dangerous to the system. This usually happens through actions small enough that they don't trigger fear, exposure, or identity collapse. Quiet steps that register as survivable. When the body experiences action without punishment, something shifts. Muscles loosen. Attention steadies. The nervous system relearns that movement does not automatically lead to loss. Motivation then forms naturally, not as excitement, but as willingness. This is why pressure rarely restores drive. Pressure increases threat. Safety restores motion. Motivation grows in environments where pace is respected and consequences feel manageable. What looks like hesitation dissolves once the system trusts that moving forward won't cost more than it can afford. Motivation breaking down is not a personal flaw. It is information. It reflects how your nervous system interprets safety, identity, and consequence during change. When understood this way, silence is no longer an enemy. It becomes a message about conditions that need adjusting. Motivation doesn't need to be chased. It needs to be allowed back, slowly, through movements that feel honest, contained, and safe enough to continue.